would first off like to acknowledge the life of Tania Marsden. I called her my auntie mama. We were very close when we were young. When I was young, I was 11 years old at the time of her disappearance and her murder happened. This is going to be very hard for me to talk about. I'm going to do my best to be very clear and not use names. I've already notified several Indigenous organizations. I've already notified Winnipeg Police by email. But I also feel that the public needs to know what had happened if they try to dismiss it. The events leading up to Tania Marsden's disappearance, there was a incident with a Winnipeg Child and Family service worker who was also a peace officer. And he was a peace officer at the time. And this incident report actually had evidence, would be enough to actually lay criminal charges on this individual. Tania Marsden, weeks before, was attempting to get help from Indigenous organizations and other nonprofit organizations to get advocacy to help her, because she was actually directed to pursue charges, criminal charges, after she turned 18. With the alleged individual, I've tried to pursue charges with him too. No documentation has ever really survived, or there's no records of anything. It completely disappears. And I'll give some context to this soon. What happened on the night of September 9th, 1998, I was a resident of Nadinaway Group Home. And Tania and me, we had plans. We were going to work towards her getting me out of foster care, and she was going to be my caregiver. We had plans to move to Saskatchewan. And, and I would have loved that. And that night when I was at Nadinaway, she was out on her 18th birthday. She had already moved out because she was too old to stay there, reached the age of majority. On the night of September 9th, 1998, Tania had contacted me at Nadinaway Group Home. And I was like, well, where are you? She's like, well, I'm just leaving the Gordon Downtowner right now. And I was like, well, what payphone are you using? Sounds like you're walking. And she had stated she had a cell phone. And I was like, where did you get a cell phone from? And she had named the alleged perpetrator. And had said that he's getting mad because he said he needs a cell phone for work and he's at home. And I said, just give him his cell phone back and just be done with him. Myself and a lot of other youth in care have had really bad incidents with this individual. So I said, I'll wait for your call. And then she's like, I'm going to answer it. Okay, I'll call you back. So what had happened was a period of time went by, and she gave me a call back, and she said that she had done, I can't remember it was so long ago, where you could do a star and you can retrieve the number that was calling you. And she said, I don't know what the hell is going on. He said that he told me that he was at home, but when I called back, I did that star 96 or something. And it said that Mr. Bones Pizza over on McPhillips had answered. Now, she says, okay, well, I'll just meet you at the Gordon. I'll meet you at the Northern Inn Hotel, and we'll go from there. We'll go to my auntie's, and my auntie or my friends, I can't remember specifically. And what she had told me was, she said she was getting scared. And I said, well, why do you have his cell phone? And what she had told me was that he had promised to help advocate to get me out of foster care. He had made her all kinds of promises that, that no harm was going to happen to me or her. And he had made made references that, like, oh, it'll be okay. I'll write letters. I'll make sure that this happens. I said, I'll meet you. And I said, just throw that cell phone out. And and she said, okay, I will. And we started walking. I started walking to the Northern Inn. I got there probably at about 10:30, 10:45 p.m. at night. And I saw Tania out front, and she gave me a hug. And what had happened was I saw her and the alleged perpetrator that I named to the organizations on Winnipeg Police. And he was standing there. He had a black t-shirt on. He had jeans, light colored blue jeans, black shoes. And he had also had driving gloves with holes on them, on the knuckles. So he had actually opened the car door, and they were in the car. And, everyone was partying. Everyone, it was kind of a loud scene out front of the Northern that night. And I was standing talking to a couple of the individuals that were there. And the individuals that were on the description, the police pictures that were wanted as suspects, were actually people that she had met at the Gordon Downtowner. I asked that you guys come forward too and make a statement to police. Don't hide from this. I understand where the intimidation factor came from, and I'll cover that here. So during that time, I was talking with this one of the individuals that was drawn, the other two ladies that were there, and she had gotten to this dark navy blue Chrysler that was driven by the alleged perpetrator. And what had happened was, a few minutes had went by, and I kept kind of looking at the car. There was a Duffy's taxi out front of that blue car. The license plate was obstructed by, there was I think there was like a fire hydrant or mailbox or something. And I couldn't see. And then what happened was the car started rocking and shaking. And at that time, I was kind of like, well, what the hell's going on here? And one of those ladies like, oh, that's it. I don't know, maybe you should just kind of leave them alone. And they thought that something else was happening. And as the car kept shaking, what happened was the horn started honking, and the car was really rocking back and forth. And at that time, I was 11 years old. I couldn't really, I was trying to process what was going on here. And then I was like, well, that's this, I think that's so-and-so. And I said, we better go help her. So me and the individuals who were, me and the other individuals who were present, we started running towards the car. And what had happened was the car had actually sped away. The car had sped away, and it kind of did a burnout, and then it kind of stopped in the middle of the road. And then the car was still shaking violently. And then it sped off, and then we were kind of wondering what the heck was going on there. And then they were like, oh, and then the lady was like, I think something's wrong. And I said, well, someone needs to call the police. And I was like, well, call the police. And I tried going in the Northern Inn to try call the police, and the bouncer was like, oh, you can't be in here, you're too young. I was 11 years old, fair enough. And I was really unable to process what had happened, and I had gone back to Nadinaway that night. They had to do another intake and reopen my bed. I had told the worker what had happened and who was involved and who I had seen her with. And he was like, well, it sounds really far-fetched. And I said, I don't really know what happened there. And I said, we tried calling the cops, and I had asked him to make a chart note of it. Now, what had also happened was, weeks gone by, and then the police actually came to Nadinaway to actually notify me and ask questions about it. And I told them, and I said she was with this individual. I said that she was with this individual. He was calling here from her cell phone, and the Winnipeg police constable had told me no. He's assisting with this investigation too. And they had told me he is a peace officer. He would never do that. I had tried telling him, yes, this is what happened. What had also happened too is some time went by in a way, and I was there during the daytime. And the director at the time, who I'm not going to name, the police can find that out, had actually, tried to, articulate what I was saying. And he was like, oh, this can't be true, The Nadino aid worker had also done that star thing, and they had actually written down the cell phone number. The director of Nadino had called back that number, and the alleged individual answered the phone. And all I heard him say was, oh, fuck, I don't know, this is so hard to deal with this guy. I can't deal with this guy right now. And he's like, well, if they call back, they'll make a note. I don't know if that case note was there. And what the worker had done, the night shift workers, he had made double copies because it was so known that this alleged perpetrator and his other victims, that the documentation does disappear. And he had made an identical copy. I don't know if that's still in the archives. I'm praying to our great spirit, our Heavenly Father, Creator, that it is still there. Now, what had happened a couple of days later, and I'll give you some context, is the alleged perpetrator had shown up to get the case notes of any potential evidence. And when I had seen him, he had a bandage on his arm, and there was blood seeping through it. And I asked him, I said, well, what happened to your arm? And I was completely terrified. And he's like, oh, just, a kid bit me while I was restraining him. And he's like, well, where were you on the night? And then I was like, I was here. And then I kind of diffused it. Yeah, don't worry about it. And I said, okay. And I walked over, and I kind of, out of fear for my own life and safety, because I've had very, very violent incidents with this individual too, the alleged perpetrator. Now, what had happened is that I had actually contacted Winnipeg Police Service to tell them my side and what I had seen and what I had witnessed. And I said she wasn't at the Gordon Down. I was there with her at the Northern Inn. And what had happened was I was met with racism. They had said, no, we've already done the investigation, he said. Native people did this, okay? And I said, no, this is so-and-so. And he said, the peace officer? And I was like, yeah, I'm like, it was him. I saw them. They were scuffling. There was a lot of things going on in that vehicle. It was jumping back and forth. And he told me, and he had directly told me, white people don't do this stuff to each other. Native people do this stuff to each other. Yeah, maybe I'll come take your statement, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange that you and this alleged perpetrator have a conversation with each other. Given that time and my size and my age, I was deathly terrified, given the violent history between me and this individual. And I had kept quiet. Now, there was another incident that happened in about year 2000 where I ran into the alleged perpetrator at Winnipeg Public Library, and he was trying to question me. And he was saying, hey, were you at the Northern? You need to tell me the fucking truth. And he started getting in my face. 2 Winnipeg police officers were there, and I waved at them. I said, this guy's saying he's a peace officer. And I told him, I said, and I tried talking about the Tania Marsden. They said, well, they're investigating that, go to the police station. And I left abruptly to get myself out of that situation with this individual. And rather than going to a police station, I ended up running. And I ended up running and getting as far as away from that place as I could. And I tried leaving town at that point. Now, the hard part about it is that how it's been constantly dismissed. Given the organized nature of this alleged perpetrator's crimes, his ability to use a peace officer badge, his ability to use his legitimate roles as a social worker, and to basically just remove anything and everything. Given the history that I've heard from other kids in care about violent assaults, sexual assaults, it just felt like it was a losing battle. Even more recently, I've had a battle with this guy, and I ran into him again. Working with an Indigenous organization in a legitimate role as a social worker. Didn't recognize him at first. It's been so many years. The hard part about it was one of the individuals that was drawn on the pictures there. I had actually ran into all of them, and they were like, why are our faces labeled as suspects when we spoke with all the police? Why are we drawn out? They were asking themselves. And why did they say that she was at the Gordon Downtowner and she was last seen there when we were with her at the Northern Inn? And they had tried to contact police and it was dismissed. When I ran into the male with the mustache, I'd actually ran into him same area by the Northern Point Douglas area. And what had happened was we talked. The investigation was still going. And we actually went inside the Northern and we were like, hey, where's the security footage? And they said that a police officer came and got it. He had a badge and he had a revolver, old school revolver, on his hip, plain clothes. And the male with the mustache had actually told me, yeah, that's the same guy that I spoke to. And what the male had stated was that, he'd given his story and everything else like that. And then he'd kind of grabbed him and kind of roughed him up and said, kind of got violent with him and started saying like, you're beginning to look a lot like a suspect now. And that wasn't Tania that was there. He said he had told him that, it was him and the other police officers had confirmed that was another individual who looks like Tania, but it wasn't her. And they were able to, they spoke to her already. And the male had actually said, I don't even want to go talk about this. I said, well, we have to, and you got to tell somebody. And we tried to figure out who we could talk to, and then given the history and everything that I had told him with my experience and other kids' experiences and Tania's experience with him, what had happened was he got scared. And I got scared too. At that time in my life, I was just tiny, okay? I wouldn't be able to defend myself against this individual. I have left out names due to legalities, different organizations. I've notified who I need to. And I am making this video just in case Winnipeg Police Service tries to dismiss this. Anybody and everybody who has ever tried to lay charges on this individual for sexual assault, for rape, child pornography, abuse, violence has either ended, has been met with violence, has been intimidated by unknown individuals in the community. They've all been met with child welfare workers, harassment from child welfare workers stating, that there's child neglect, or some were even sent to mental health facilities under the clause that they were in psychosis or mentally unwell or suicidal. In all of his legitimate roles, he has been able to cover up his crimes all these years. And that's why I'm carrying this eagle feather, because I would not lie holding an eagle feather. And the Creator, and I want the Creator, our Creator God, to know what I'm doing here. I lived in silence for so long about this in fear. What brought this up was the alleged perpetrator, an individual, had actually asked people within my professional circle, if I was outside of the Northern Inn that night, and to, go and speak with him, as a peace officer, and it's going to be safe and it's going to be okay. I immediately denied it right there because I knew it was the same individual. I've had so many run-ins with this person that I was never able to pursue charges because there's no documentation of it. Either that or I was labeled not a credible witness. Even when I contacted Winnipeg police, they said that I wasn't credible and that I have mental health issues. And those are the tools that this individual has used to be able to manipulate the system to work to his benefit. And this has been a really hard video. I'm probably on my 10th take right now, trying to ensure that I get all the necessary information out to the community. Now, due to legalities and things, I'll only give my first name. It's Matthew. And the community needs to know who this alleged perpetrator is. And I will be, it's just so I don't face a lawsuit or anything. And I've already told in the Indigenous organizations around town. I will be updating the community here again once I know more about if the investigation is going to be reopened and where it's going to go. But right now they're taking time with it. And because of this individual's legitimate role, it most likely will be, they'll try to cover it up again. And when that happens, I'll come out with his name. I will come out with his information, who he is. I will also come out with all the different aliases that he has used within Winnipeg Child and Family Services. Thank you. Ekose.